good 50, 60 mile an hour click coming through these things.
Welcome back to the channel, guys. It is great to see you again. This is actually part 2 of my 2016 RZR XP4 Shock service. So if you didn't see that first video, make sure you jump over and watch that one where we get inside these things. We give you some tips on how to maintain your shocks. But in today's video, it's time to get these things back together. So what did we order? Well, I want to talk about one thing, guys, that often gets looked over when you're rebuilding your shocks, whether you take it to a shop or whether you're doing it yourself. Now, when your shocks blow out, you've got all that oil running down the shaft and it runs directly into the bumper. So when you're tearing apart your shocks, you're getting the seal heads all apart, you're getting everything cleaned out. Don't forget to get fresh bumpers, guys. If you don't replace the bumpers and you go through all that work to get these shocks serviced and you put old bumpers on, as soon as you hit a bump, that thing's going to squeeze out oil everywhere and you're going to think that your shocks are leaking. So replace the bumpers, all right? The next thing we did is we obviously picked up some fresh seal kits. Now I do have a company that has been getting these things to us super, super quick. I'll link them below. They've been excellent. So just factory seals. There's nothing aftermarket that we use here, but the company that I've been using is very, very quick and efficient. So I'll link them down below in case you guys are doing this at home. Now, the other thing I want to talk to you guys about is this is a 2016 and it is on the factory springs. As you saw in the last video, this thing was beat. So we're going to upgrade the springs. And the reason that we're going to upgrade the springs is not only because it's a 2016 and the factory ones are worn out and tired, but don't forget, guys, when they're building these cars, they're always very price conscious. So basically, the coils that are going to come on your car are going to be the cheapest that they can manufacture them. So even if your shocks aren't blown out, it is a great upgrade to put fresh springs on it. Now, the company that I've been using for over 15 years is Swift Springs. This is a Japanese brand that I've been using for a very long time. They have a proprietary coating. They come with this satin black finish, which I love. But the cool thing on the proprietary coating is even if the cars throw rocks all over the place and chip up all your new springs, let me show you something. This one here, guys, this thing's probably 15 years old. As you can see on the bottom, the paint is completely gone. Now, we're also involved in a lot of desert racing, a lot of short course racing, close competition, and even trail cars. So we have an entire selection of coils that we take with us when we go out and tune. Now, these go on and off cars, they go on and off race cars, and as you can see, they get completely worked, and we wash them after every time so that when we go to use them again, they're dialed in and ready to go. So this is proof in the pudding, guys. This stuff is awesome. No corrosion, nothing to attack the coil. I highly recommend you guys check that out. You can actually leave some comments down below if you want a suggestion from me on what coils to run in your car. Or don't forget the boys over at Swift. They're very knowledgeable. The entire staff is nice. They pick up the phone. They'll answer your questions. So now I think there's nothing left to do but put these things together. Let's go. So now that we got our shim stacks laid out, we're just going to be replacing the shims that were damaged. So it's these top shims on here. You can see what happens. Let me grab a piston and show you. Basically what happens is these things try to suck themselves back into the ports when they're flowing back and forth. So it's nothing you can really do. It's just kind of something you gotta replace these and put new ones in. So this one's damaged, and then we've got this guy damaged as well. So it was only on the one side of the shock, so that doesn't mean that they don't have the same amount of wear. So we actually got shims to replace on both sides because they both got equal amount of wear. So just so that a failure doesn't happen in this one, everything will get replaced. Alright, so now the seal head assembly is all completely cleaned out. Everything's good to go. We're going to put in the new seals. I like to put a little bit of the oil in the cap and use that kind of to just lube all these rings when they go back in. So All right, so I want to show you guys one thing. I've got my piston assembly on. Below it, I've got my compression stack. That's on. Again, this is all factory spec, so nothing's been modified. This is exactly how it looks. Now notice above the piston how much shaft space we have for the shims to sit on. There's not a ton of space before we hit a bunch of threads. So watch when I start adding the rebound stack what happens here. Now you can see how we're getting really close to no more room on this shaft assembly. And I know I've talked to a lot of you guys about tuning these shocks. And if someone's out there tuning these and they're putting a bunch of shims in, what happens is the shims jump up on the threads because you run out of room, and it eats the inside of these shims out from flexing on the threads. So hopefully this is a good visual for you guys. I know I've had a lot of conversations about that regarding there's not a lot of real estate inside these shocks to add a bunch of tune. So let's get the rest of this stuff on here and you'll see what we got for space. So that's it right there. That's flush. There's no more space for any shims. So the spacer goes on. We put the nut. We're going to torque this thing down, and then we're going to actually assemble the shock. All right, guys. So one last thing I want to show you before we assemble these shocks is let's take a look at the way this system works for topping out. Now, a lot of you guys might remember back when these cars first came out, a ton of guys were bending these shafts. Now, I've always told you guys, make sure you put limit straps on your car because it's definitely going to save your investment, whether you're running a factory shock or even an aftermarket shock. But when you look at this seal head design has a step to it, and it's there for a reason, because when your shocks go to full extension, it helps hydraulically slow down the shock. But what happens is you see the bleed holes. There's one here, and there's one on the opposite side. Those bleed holes get covered up. So when your car is at full droop and you're airborne, the only place the oil has to go when you come back down to the ground is through these compression ports. So it gets a big spike. And what happens is those bleed holes are closed right now, so it can sometimes hydraulic if you run too thick of oil in the shock and bend the shafts. So hopefully you guys will get a good visual on this. Run limit straps on your car. Let's assemble these babies. All right, so once you've got your shock fully bled out and this thing's got no more air bubbles in it, you are pretty much ready to cap it off and charge it up. Alright, so once we got our snap ring in and everything's good to go, I'm going to replace this Schrader core, which is actually pretty cool. It comes with the new kit, which is not something you get from Walker, but the company that we've been getting kits from, they're nice enough to put these in with it, so it's pretty handy to get some fresh Schrader cores because these things don't last forever. So just clean it out real good, put in your fresh core. And what I like to do is just kind of a test, because I actually just have a hand pump just to test everything. I'll ramp this up to about 100 psi. You probably saw the shaft move up. That's definitely a good sign. You want solid fluid in this sucker. So it's up to about 100 psi right now. And this is just air. Again, this is just what I do for testing. And then the final assembly will be nitrogen. All right, we're good to go. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually release. I'm going to release this pressure back out because this was just air. I'm going to release that back out. I'm going to get the tank and we're going to fill it up with some gas. I'm going to set these at 200 psi. All right, guys, that is a wrap for this Project 2016 RZR XP4. These shocks are good to go. We got fresh fluids, fresh seal kits, new bumpers, and let's not forget we got fresh springs in this car. Thank you guys for hanging out. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you've got some comments about your own car, or even if you'd like to see a different car on the channel, make sure you leave those comments down below. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys. We'll see you in the next one.